Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar in Risk and Management Portfolio. My name is Alba Kecha, the organizer of this webinar. Today's webinar will be on the benchmark for risk management in uncertain times, which will be presented by PCB trainer Jacob McLean, Principal Consultant and Managing Director of Kaizen Training and Management Consultants Limited. Focus on enterprise-wide risk management has grown, but most executives feel their companies still have a long way to go in building an effective risk-aware culture. Therefore, this live webinar will cover the following topics: the overview of ISO 31000 and how this standard implies threats but opportunities as well, principles, processes, and framework of ISO 31000, and how organization can reduce uncertainty, opportunities, and treat risk. Before Jacob begins his presentation, I would also like to ask the audience to please write down any questions you may have during the webinar in the chat box on your control panel, and we will respond to a few of them at the end and answer the remaining through email. Thank you for your attention and enjoy this webinar. Jacob, you may begin.
Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I'm happy to participate in this webinar. It is, as you have heard, on the ISO 31000 standard. And we're looking at it in terms of it being a benchmark for risk management in uncertain times. A benchmark is a standard or a point of reference against which things may be compared. And indeed, the ISO 31000 standard is such a benchmark for risk management. During this webinar, we hope to achieve the following objectives: that you understand the concept of risk as the effect of uncertainty on objectives, which is the basic definition that the standard gives. You should understand as well that risk management principles, framework, and process in the context of a risk management system, and appreciate the value of ISO 31000 as a benchmark for managing risks. By way of introduction, as I mentioned just now, the standard defines risk as the effect of uncertainty on objectives. It really implies threats as well as opportunities. And looking at risk from this perspective is the basis, the essence of risk-based thinking. And all standards that are being developed now, and more recently developed standards that the ISO organization is putting out, are based on risk management. The recently published ISO 9001 standard 2015 version, ISO 14001 standard 2015 version, ISO 22301 business continuity management, the OHSAS standard, and ISO 27005 2011 information security risk management. All are focused on risk management, and the ISO 31 standard is relevant to all of these. The principles, processes, and framework of ISO 31000 provide the benchmark for managing risks as they relate to tasks, processes, functions, enterprises. We'll discuss this. The risk management system, based on this standard, reduces uncertainty, enables the organization to seize opportunities while treating risks as opportunities appropriately. It enables continual improvement and, in fact, charts the way to business success in uncertain times. Our time in history is the most uncertain that humans have encountered. How do we cope with the uncertainty that life faces and poses to us now? Whether we are individuals working on our own or as members of organizations, we need a benchmark. And I believe that ISO 31000 provides this benchmark. The standard really belongs to a family of standards. The ISO 31000 family of standards. ISO 31000 2009 is the standard which provides principles and guidelines, framework, and process. There's an accompanying standard or guide, ISO Guide 73, which provides risk management vocabulary. And then ISO IEC 31010-2009 speaks to risk assessment. It reflects current good practices in selection and utilization of risk assessment techniques. All three work together, and together they present an excellent guide or benchmark for managing risks. Who are the stakeholders? Who are the users of ISO 31000? Those responsible for implementing risk management, those who need to ensure sound risk management, those who manage risk for the organization or a specific area of activity within an organization. And of course, those needing to evaluate an organization's practices in managing risk. In other words, it provides an assessment tool to evaluate, to assess, to gauge how well you're managing risk in your organizations. So these are the stakeholders, very broad. The standard is applicable to large organizations, small organizations, tangible goods producing organizations, as well as intangible or service organizations. The scope of the standard is very wide. It provides principles and generic guidelines on implementation of risk management and focuses on managing uncertainty in meeting of objectives. There is very little certainty and hence the need for risk management. This standard emphasizes the importance of risk communication. As I mentioned, it is applicable to any type of organization. Whilst it's not certifiable, it does provide information and guidance in other standards to which organizations can be certified. I mentioned the quality management standard, environmental standards, business continuity management, and others. It harmonizes risk management processes by providing a common approach in support of standards dealing with specific risks and or sectors, but does not replace those standards. So whilst it provides the information for managing risk, it's not a replacement for the standards. It is just a source of information on risk management. What are the key emphases of the standard? It stresses commitment to diligent risk management, and that is of fundamental importance. Word diligent suggests focus, it suggests understanding one's organization, one's context, inside business, internal context, as well as the external context. It is fulsome in its approach. It encourages priority setting. Of course, we live in a world that is filled with risk. We face risk every day. However, some risks are not worth focusing on because they're low and the probability of occurrence is so minimal that it's hardly worth the while. So this standard provides guidance in setting priority for risk management. It explains that risk management should itself create value, and that is a key point. Risk management must create value for the organization. Value in terms of exposing and highlighting opportunities which can be seized by the organization, as well as highlighting those risks that would lead to the demise of the organization, and hence guiding or suggesting ways that they can be properly mitigated. It stresses the importance of context, internal as well as external, and addresses the sometimes confusing issue of risk terminology. There are many words, many concepts about risk, but the family of standards bring together and codify words that are acceptable and internationally recognized as pertaining to risk management. The standard adopts the viewpoint that risk management is integral to the organization's structures, responsibilities, and objectives. This framework you're looking at really depicts the architecture of the standard, the principles, the framework, the process. To the right, we have the principles for managing risks, creating value. It's integral to the organization's processes. It's part of the decision-making process. Just to mention the integral nature of risk management, every aspect of an organization involves risks. Strategic risk, operational risk, risk throughout the organization. Really looking at risk from the enterprise perspective. So these principles then highlight the nature of risk as determined and as conceptualized in the standards, tailored to the particular need of the organization. Hence, it's not geared to large organizations or small organizations. It's across the board. It takes human and cultural factors into consideration, into account. Hence, it is applicable throughout the world because it's generic in nature and forces us to look at the particular context. Looking at the framework in the middle, these relate to the clauses of the standard. So in order to effectively manage risk, there must be a mandate and commitment. And this starts with top management. Top management, like in all other standards, must commit to diligent risk management, must recognize the need for risk management and set the tone. And then we have the following areas: design framework for managing risk. I must make the point that this follows the plan, do, check, act, or the Deming wheel. We have 4.4, implementing risk management. So this design, that's a planning; implementing, that's act. And then we have monitoring and review of the risk management framework, the checking, and finally the acting, taking action in response to what we're seeing, the trends we're seeing. And this involves, as you can see, a cyclical or iterative approach. It goes on and on, continually improving and ensuring that the organization is conversant with emerging risks and able to manage effectively. So on your right, you're looking at the process for risk management. Now, the process for risk management entails a broad concept: risk assessment, which involves establishing the context, assessing the risks, which is further broken down to mean identifying those risks, analyzing those risks, evaluating, and finally treating the risk. But it doesn't end there. Monitoring and review must happen, and that is a continuous process. And throughout all of this, there must be communication and consulting. So this is the framework, the principles, and the process as conceptualized in the ISO 31000 standard. Here are the principles. We mentioned them before. They are very inclusive. They cover all conceivable aspects. Creating value is the essence. It's a key. Risk management must create value for the organization. And it does, if done in accordance with the guidelines entailed in this standard. The principles provide a foundation for the rest of the standard. The organization's approach to risk management should be an integral part of its processes, especially decision-making processes. Absolutely essential that the organization integrates risk management into its strategic approach, into its business planning. It cannot be a sideshow. It must be integral. And of course, tailored to its environment, creating value, protecting value, and of course, must support and encourage continual improvement. So those are the principles. The process, let me give a little bit of explanation here. It includes establishing the context. Now, every organization operates in a particular environment. Every organization has its own idiosyncrasies, its own culture. So the context of the organization, where is it? The political environment, the economic environment, all of those must be taken into consideration. So the context is important. The legal framework, legal environment within which the organization is operating, those are important. So establishing the context, internal context, external context are critical. Communicating and consulting happens throughout. It must be understood that risk management does not happen in a vacuum. All players must be on board, and hence the communicating and consulting. And we mentioned risk management, risk assessment, risk treatment, and the monitoring and review of risks, which is continuous and iterative. Let's talk about the context, establishing the context. What does that entail? It requires considering the following: objectives and operating environment of the organization, relevant legislation, stakeholder identification and analysis. Who are the persons interested in the organization? Who are the persons the organization is interested in? Who can add value? Who can detract from value of the organization? Government policy, the corporate policy, management structures within the organization. Is it a sole trader? Is it a part of a corporate group? What are the factors that should be taken into consideration? What type of organization is it? A functional organization, divisional, a matrix type organization? How is it managed? Community expectation. Organizations must be conscious and cognizant of the communities in which they operate. There are various non-governmental organizations that are interested in the organization and its impact. No longer can organizations operate oblivious of the context of the community expectations. We therefore must ensure that risk management takes the community into consideration. And then general criteria, but whatever else applies. The consequence criteria. What standard are you looking at in terms of criteria? How are you going to be assessed? What are you going to be assessed against? Matter of communicating and consulting, this seeks to improve performance based on informed, mutual decisions about risk. Informed, based on data, information gathered. It's about being realistic as well as being hopeful. Yes, we can be hopeful. However, we must take factors into consideration relating to uncertainty. And this uncertainty must be thought through, analyzed, and decisions made with respect to how the uncertainty can benefit the organization or put the organization at risk. The aim is not to avoid all conflict or to diffuse all concerns. Not at all. In fact, this is not possible. However, it is based on getting understanding, establishing a level of understanding with the stakeholders, internally and externally, such that risk management can be implemented in a way that everyone understands and that no one is left behind. This graphic illustrates the concepts in a very broad kind of way. Number one, at the very top, speaks of communication and consultation. Number two, the context, objectives, deciding on objectives, the stakeholders, the criteria, the standard, defining the key elements. Number three speaks to identification of risk. What can happen? What can go wrong? How can it go wrong? And then analyzing the risk, reviewing existing controls, likelihoods or probabilities, consequences, and determining level of risks. Evaluating risk, ranking the risk. What is high? What is low? What is medium? And then treating risks by identifying options, selecting best responses, developing treatment plans and implementing those plans. And finally, monitoring and reviewing, which goes on and on. This is the risk management process. And this is the process that this standards, this ISO 31000 standards bring to bear on the risk management within organizations. Risk assessment, a key element in risk management. This comprises 3 basic steps: risk identification, risk analysis, and risk evaluation. What is the threat? What is the opportunity? What event? What task? What natural disaster possibility? Again, depending on context. Analyzing the risk, considering likelihoods and consequences, and risk evaluation, as we just said, ranking the risk and deciding on treatment. What are the benefits of risk assessment? First and foremost, it provides understanding of risks, their causes, impacts, and probabilities. Risk assessment provides input to decision making regarding the following: whether the activity should be undertaken. So decision making point, go or no go. How to maximize opportunities. You see, risk is not just a negative concept at all. In fact, it can be negative, but it can also be positive or simply neutral. This risk assessment helps us to determine whether risks need treatment. Enables prioritizing of the treatment options. It also helps us to treat risk, to develop risk strategies that will bring adverse risk to tolerable levels. And tolerable levels suggest that different organizations have different levels of risk tolerability or risk appetites. Risk assessment enables us to choose between options with different risks. So the organization can do its own assessment and by that process determine whether or not it's going to go forward with an activity based on the level of risk that the opportunity poses to the organization. How does the process work? The risk assessment process. First and foremost, the context. Again, we see this concept coming through. What is the context of the organization? External context, the internal context. What is the risk management context? Where are we assessing the risk? The risk criteria. What standard are we going to be using? What is the structure involved? And then identification of risk is the second step. We consider what can happen, when, where, and how. What are the key processes, the tasks, the activities? What are the risk areas? And then considering all of that enables us to define the risk, categorize the risk. And there are various methods for risk identification. Brainstorming is one that is often used, and there are many others. The risk assessment process works by finding, recognizing, and describing risks that could affect the achievement of objectives. We must identify the sources of risks, and this is different for various organizations. It includes identification of possible causes and potential consequences. The third step is analyzing the risk, and this idea of analyzing means digging into the risk, separating the minor from the major, providing data for risk evaluation. The analysis process enables the evaluation process, which comes up next. Identifying controls. What controls are in place? Are they good? Are they relevant? Do they work? Determine likelihood. Likelihood is a term we use which is really tantamount to probability. What is the chance of occurrence? Then we determine the consequence of the risk. What could happen? The impact on the organization. And we consider the level of risk. And this can be determined quantitatively or possibly qualitatively, high, low, medium. Or we can gauge the level of risk, because risk really means the sum or the product of likelihood and consequence of the risk. Where possible, we can even place confidence limits on the estimates. And of course, we use best available information in analyzing our risks. The fourth step is evaluation of the risk. This involves identifying the tolerable versus the unacceptable risk, which is based on the organization's risk appetite. So we compare the risk rating with the risk criteria that the organization has developed based on its appetite for risk. And then we prioritize the risk for treatment. What are we going to put our money on? In risk management, we want the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak. We're going to ensure that those risks which are of most significance, pose the greatest threat to the organization, are focused on. But remember, risk is not only negative. There may as well be opportunities. What are the biggest opportunities? What are we going for? Consider how the evaluation process works. The objectives of the project and the opportunities must be considered. The tolerability of the risks, whether the risk needs treatment, and this is a call based on the level of risk that would have identified. We consider if activity should really be undertaken. It may be that the risk is so large that we decide not to go there, not to undertake that risk. It may be a huge opportunity, but we don't have the capital, we don't have the personnel, we're not ready at this time to take on such an opportunity. So the evaluation provides guidance as to what the organization should do, prioritizing the treatment of risks. Let's look at some options for risk treatment. We consider reducing the likelihood of the consequence. Either of these could be done. Reducing the likelihood means that the risk occurrence is that much less. It is reduced by the actions that are taken. And then there's the possibility of reducing the consequence, insulating the organization in such a way that if this particular risk does materialize, the organization will be in a position to withstand. Contingency planning, business continuity management. That's one way of managing risks, ensuring that the organization is prepared for possibilities that could occur, be they events or natural man-made events, natural disasters, or other types. Sharing in full or in part. This is always a possibility. This, of course, may produce another risk. There is outsourcing, there is insurance, there is the use of contractors. There are all of these. And of course, there is avoidance. And this avoidance does not mean that the organization is averse to risk. It is simply a common sense approach, if you will, deciding we will not go there perhaps at this time. We're just not ready. Or that is not a fit with our business. The organization will invariably retain residual risks. And the matter of retaining of risk is dependent on the organization's risk appetite. But residual risk will always be there. The organization must determine what level of risk it is comfortable with. The risk treatment plans. These must be documented. And in documenting our risk treatment plans, we must determine who is responsible. If everybody is responsible, obviously nobody is responsible. Who is the person? What function? Who is the individual? Schedules for treatment. When? Expected outcomes. How is the risk going to be reduced? How is the opportunity going to be exploited? What would that look like? The budget. Usually, a budget is necessary, whether it is to fix a potential problem or to seize a potential opportunity. Budget. Performance measures, metrics, KPIs. How are we going to know that the risk is being managed, so the opportunities are being exploited? We need some measures. And of course, there must be a review process. This review process must be constant. We must keep our eyes on the radar. We must understand what is happening so that we can take corrective action by exception if necessary. Let's talk about the concept of ALARP, as low as reasonably practicable. This speaks to a level of risk that is tolerable and can be reduced further without the expenditure of costs that are disproportionate to the benefit gained or where the solution is impractical to implement. You will see here on the y-axis risk, on the x-axis cost or benefit. You'll notice that when no cost is applied to the mitigation of the risk is very high. But as resources expended, as effort is made, as money is spent, the risks become lower and lower. As costs increase, as efforts to reduce the risk increase, the risk reduces. But then there comes a point where the cost of reducing the risk further becomes exceptionally high. It begins to rise at a very steep rate. At this point, the risk is as low as reasonably practicable. And this concept is embedded in ISO 31000. Risk should be treated to the point where it is no longer beneficial to throw money at it, to throw resources at it. It is as low as reasonably practicable. This next slide illustrates the concept of ALARP. You notice the upside down pyramid. The red illustrates the intolerable risks that you just cannot live with. You cannot undertake this kind of risk or opportunities. You cannot be exposed. So you will not, the organization will decide, we cannot. This is outside our scope. We will not deal with this. But in between the red and the green is a broadly acceptable risk. No problem with that area. But in the middle, you will see the extent of ALARP. You see here that arrow going across. This is a tolerable risk. And we want to focus our efforts in this area because this is where great value can be gained for the organization. Let's talk about risk treatment based on risk evaluation. When the risk is low, no additional controls are required unless the cost is minimal. We can live with it. It is low, let's face it. If it is medium, the organization should give consideration to whether the risk can be lowered to the tolerable level within its risk appetite. So it should be given focus and attention. If it is high, substantial efforts should be made to reduce the risk. Consider, for instance, suspending or restricting the activity or apply some interim risk control measures. High risk loom large on the radar and must be given significant focus. Risks are very high, and this will be seen in the red area. In fact, both high and very high would be in the red area. but the very high raises alarms because it is necessary to effect substantial improvements to reduce these risks to a tolerable or acceptable level before proceeding. So this is the result of the evaluation. This is treating risk, the approach to treating risk based on having done the necessary evaluation. The monitoring and review aspect of risk management is one that goes on and on and on. As the first bullet there says, risk management is a journey and not a destination. You see, what may be of minor significance today may be the disaster of tomorrow. Hence the need for monitoring, reviewing, reassessing, an iterative process, on and on. Review is an integral part of the risk management process. We've said a lot, but as we draw to the close of this webinar, let's consider the attributes of enhanced risk management, which the ISO 31000 posits and encourages. Comprehensive, fully and accepted accountability for risk and controls and the treatment task is one of the key attributes of enhanced risk management. It allows for named individuals to fully accept the risk that they are charged with the responsibility for. They are appropriately skilled and have adequate resources to check the controls, monitor the risks, improve those controls, and communicate effectively about risk and their management to interested parties. Interested parties inside the organization, top management, for instance, external parties, government agencies, customers, suppliers, others. Enhanced risk management allows for the making of decisions within the organization at whatever level, at various levels. It involves the explicit consideration of risks and the application of the risk management process to some appropriate degree. In other words, it cascades throughout the organization. So at every level, there is the application of risk in the atmosphere of enhanced risk management. There's a pronounced emphasis on continuous improvement. And we know the concept really is continual improvement because no system can be improving continuously. Continual improvement must happen. How does this happen? Reviewing performance, measurement, looking at our processes, our systems, ensuring that resources are available, that recommendations coming out of our reviews are addressed. Continual communications and highly visible, comprehensive, and frequent reporting and performance to all interested parties. This is part of the governance process, which leads to effective risk management within the organization. In an atmosphere of enhanced risk management is always viewed as a core organizational process, not a sideshow, where risks are considered in terms of sources of uncertainty that can be treated to maximize the chance of gain while minimizing the chance of loss. Typically, effective risk management is regarded by senior managers as essential to the achievement of the organization's objective. So senior management have bought into risk management. It is integral in the strategic planning process. The organization's governance structure and processes are founded on risk management, the risk management process. ISO 31000 provides the opportunity for organizations to benchmark themselves against what is world-class best practices. It is an opportunity to apply the plan, do, check, act approach to risk management. Such an approach will enable organizations to manage uncertainty, manage risks in these uncertain times. I thank you very much for listening. I welcome your questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob, for this excellent presentation. We have a few questions, which we will answer to them accordingly. The first question is, what is the difference between risk impact and risk level?
Risk impact and risk level. The two terms are almost synonymous. The risk impact speaks to the consequence, and the consequence would come out of the analysis of risk. So when we look at risk, we look at the likelihood or the chance of occurrence, and we look at the impact or consequence that could result. The risk impact then is what determines how we approach the risk. So if it is high, potentially high, then the organization is going to expend resources to ensure that that risk is controlled. On the other hand, it could be an opportunity. If the impact is high, the organization will want to make sure that it gears up to seize that opportunity because the potential benefits are significant. The risk level, on the other hand, speaks to how we rate the risk. Is it high? Is it low? Is it medium? So although it is implied when we speak about risk impact, we're really speaking about the category of the risk, how we categorize the risk: high, low, medium. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. The next question is, are there any organizations that need not implement the enterprise risk management?
Thank you for that question. Enterprise risk management speaks to applying the principles of risk management to the organization. Now, the fact is, all organizations face risk. Individuals face risk. It is a wise approach to look at enterprise risk management in the context of your organization. So one of the key principles of ISO 31 is that risk management must be tailored. That means it should fit the particular organization. So whether you're a large multinational or a small mom and pop shop, you face risks. So your approach as a small organization is going to be different from that of the multinational. However, you need to manage risks. So in totality, risk management for you would be a different approach compared to the large multinational, but it is very relevant nevertheless. You must look at your context. You must look at the risk that could impact your organization. Internally, you must consider the stakeholders as well as external stakeholders. So yes, it's different, the approach is different, but it is very relevant to all organizations, large or small.
Thank you. The next question is aspects and impacts evaluation not a risk management process? What are the differences between risk based on ISO 41001 and OSAS 18001?
Well, that's a big question. Now, aspects and impacts, when we speak of aspects and impacts, we're really thinking in terms of environmental management. ISO 14001. When we look at our aspects, we look at those elements of the organization that interacts, which can produce impacts, negative or positive, on the environment. Now, assessing aspects and impacts is really risk management. And if you think about it, the environmental impact assessment is a tool that is used in environmental management. So invariably, when you're looking at the aspects of your organization, for instance, burning of fossil fuel, use of water, these are will have impacts on the environment. So you're really considering what are the significant impacts. And you're required, if you implement ISO 14001, to consider the significant impacts that are related to your aspects. And then you must develop objectives, targets, and programs to address these. So there you go. That's applying the principles of risk management. 18001 speaks to health and safety. An organization implementing the standard must assess the risks throughout its organization that could have negative impacts on employees. Standard defines health and safety as having to do with people in the organization. So what are they exposed to? Are they exposed to dust? If there's a possibility that persons could get hurt based on the tasks they perform. So assess those risks. Again, the principles of ISO 31000 come into play. So being a generic standard, it is applicable to these other standards, which are part of the ISO family of standards.
Thank you, Jacob. Yes. Thank you. The following question is, how do I write a risk report, particularly for a telecommunication company?
Okay. That's your context there, based on your organization, is telecommunications. Now, you need to identify the risks related to your particular organization. So there are some common risks related to telecoms. You need to identify those. But there will be a risk particular to your organization. So the first step would be to identify the risks that are relevant in your context, meaning where you're operating, what are the laws that are applicable, what are the resources, the risk related to resources at your command, information, people resources, infrastructure, technology. You need to assess all of those risks. In assessing the risk, you're going to identify, you're going to analyze, you're going to evaluate, and then you're going to consider the monitoring, the treatment of those risks. How are you going to treat those risks? And then, of course, following that, you're going to develop measures to monitor and to review those risks. So a risk report in that context is no different from the generic approach posited by the standard. However, you have to take your organization into consideration. The telecom, what is particular about this type of organization?
Thank you. I just want to inform all the attendees that we will answer just a few more questions, and the remaining will be answered by email. So let's go to the next question, which is, what is the relation between threats and risk sources?
Okay, good question. Now, the threats facing an organization emanate or come out of the types of risks that the organization faces. So for instance, if an organization is operating in the oil and gas industry, there are certain possibilities. The fact that you're working with petrochemicals present a particular type of risk. So a threat would relate to, say, fire and explosion. It could relate to sabotage. So the threat is directly related to the particular organization. Different organizations face different kind of threats. So I worked for a brewery at one time, and the brewery was involved not just in manufacturing or brewing beer, but also in the selling and promotion of beer. And this organization, the marketing arm, had events all over the country. Now, there were threats related to these events, and we would go out and do site visits before the event. We'd look at where the event was to be staged. We'd look at organizations that were in close proximity, and we'd consider the nearby communities. For instance, if the event was going to be near a a volatile community, then we would take particular action. We would beef up the security presence that we would have on that site, because we know that based on the nature of the event, a threat could arise from a volatile community nearby. So the threat is directly related to the risk that the organization faces. So the risk in the context of the organization having this event, the risk is the possibility of persons invading the event and causing trouble. The threat is directly related to that. It is related to the fact that there is a community nearby that is of a volatile nature. So we assess that risk and we take the mitigation measures. We have enough security personnel on hand to deal with any possibilities. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. The next question is it true that we can treat the opportunities as positive risk and manage them appropriately?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, there's a saying, particularly in finance, the higher the risk, the higher the return. We should consider both risks as opportunities and as threats. So, for instance, if I were to use the launch of a new product by say, Apple. Apple is launching a new product. It has to consider, will we have enough capacity to take on the market should people really buy into this product and desire this product? That's managing risk. They also, of course, have to consider the downside. What if it's a flop? What if nobody likes this product? They have to prepare for both. If people really like the product, they must have the capacity, whether through contractors or other means, to produce enough product to satisfy the market, to exploit fully that opportunity. If market doesn't take the product, that's a threat, rather that's a negative. It also has to be prepared to absorb the cost, write off the cost of development. So yes, it's vital to prepare to take on opportunities as they arise. And the standard does speak to that. With the 9001-2015 standard, organizations are required to assess risk and opportunities. So good quality management is not just about fixing problems, it's also about seeing opportunities that arise as we implement the standard and taking those opportunities on to the benefit of the business.
Thank you, Jacob. And finally, we have the last question, which is, how do you calculate the probability of extraordinary rain causing flooding in a place where it rains frequently? He says that meteorology history data is not too old to get usable information.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the question. Could you
Yeah, I can repeat it. How do you calculate the probability of extraordinary rain causing flooding in a place where it rains frequently?
Okay, that's an interesting one. Probability. Well, it is somewhat subjective. We normally look at the history, so frequency of occurrence, and the longer the period we look at, the more we're likely to get good and informed data-driven results. So we look at rainfall over a long period, 100 years, 50 years, and of course we know that nowadays rainfall is occurring more frequently in some places, heavier than usual because of the impact of climate change. But yes, we need to look at the past, and we take that information, and that will inform the probability that we decide on. Yes, it is subjective, but we would look at weather forecasts. We'd look at the weather pattern. We'll get meteorological data, perhaps from the government agency, and we look at that and we'll see trends. And that will give us an idea of what probability we can land on. But we must factor in the fact that rainfall is occurring more heavily and more frequently because of factors such as climate change. So, in summary, the calculation of probability in that context must be based on frequency of occurrence, and data can be had by looking at the history of rainfall in the particular area. It's going to be subjective, but it is said that the best predictor of future events is past events. Best predictor of future performance is past performance. So that's the best we can do, because we're dealing with a natural phenomenon where it's difficult to pin down. However, by looking at frequency of occurrence, we can, in fact, land on a fairly good indicator of what might happen.
Thank you, Jacob, again for this highly informative webinar. And I want to thank all the attendees as well who have taken time of their busy schedule to participate. I hope and I'm sure you all have learned something new today. This webinar is also recorded and can be found on our YouTube channel. Don't forget to check back on our upcoming webinars on topics of your interest by visiting our website or social media pages, www.pcb.com. Meet you all again next week on the 2nd of December on a topic of enterprise risk management, unsuccessful efforts due to the lack of company strategy. I'm looking forward to seeing you all next week. Until then, have a great week. Thank you.